Welcome to Beyond the Ordinary, a space for extraordinary souls navigating a world that often feels anything but simple. The battles you face, the challenges that test you, these are not random. They are the refining fires that meant to shape you into something much greater. Here, we explore the grace, strength, and wisdom that emerge when you rise above what others call impossible. This is your journey to uncover the extraordinary within. Welcome back, and if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. What you're about to hear is built differently. I use the power of AI to produce the show, not to make things up, but to save time and give you daily access to something that would otherwise take months to create. Every episode is built around a specific framework of books, lectures, expert research, and analysis distilled into a conversation that you can actually observe. And if you've been skeptical about AI, I totally understand. Like anything in this world, technology can be used to harm or to heal, anti-life or pro-life. My intention with the show is to demonstrate what's possible when you use these tools for something genuinely good, for your growth and for the world. My goal is not perfection, it is access. Access to knowledge that can authentically expand how you think and how you live. Stay open-minded and let's go deep.
Picture this scenario for a moment. Okay, the year is roughly 150 CE, and you are standing in the vibrant, dusty streets of Alexandria, Egypt.
The intellectual capital of the Roman Empire.
Exactly. It's this bustling port city. You've got philosophers arguing on the steps of marble temples and merchants unloading spices from across the known world.
It's a massive melting pot.
Right. So you walk into a shaded courtyard, and you're expecting to hear, a Greek philosopher lecturing about Plato or Aristotle.
Naturally.
But instead, the man standing at the center of the room is teaching his students to close their eyes, to control their breathing, and basically mortify their physical bodies to achieve this direct mystical communion with the Supreme Being.
Which is wild.
It is. He is, for all intents and purposes, teaching ancient, unfiltered Hindu yoga to Roman citizens in Egypt.
It's a staggering historical image. I mean, it completely shatters that illusion we often have of the ancient world being, just a collection of isolated, disconnected bubbles.
It fundamentally changes the map. I mean, how do the deeply esoteric secrets of the Indian cosmos end up being debated by Greek-speaking mystics on the shores of the Mediterranean?
That is the million-dollar question.
And that question and the massive, sprawling answers behind it is exactly why I am so thrilled to welcome you to today's deep dive.
We have a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. If you are joining us today, you're someone who craves the real story. You don't just want the dates and the names.
Right.
You want the hidden architecture of human belief. You want to understand the mechanics of history without drowning in impenetrable academic jargon. And today, we have a stack of source material that's going to give us the master key to one of the most complex civilizations on Earth.
We are looking at a truly monumental piece of scholarship today. It's H.H. Wilson's extensive preface and introduction to the Vishnu Purana.
Now, I know the Vishnu Purana might sound like a highly specific theological text. You might be sitting there wondering if we're just going to read ancient prayers for the next hour.
Which we are definitely not doing.
I promise you that is not the case. This text, and Wilson's sweeping analysis of it, functions as a skeleton key.
Yeah, it unlocks the entire mythological, historical, and religious evolution of the Hindu faith.
It shows us the exact blueprints of how an ancient civilization organized its entire universe.
So our mission today is quite ambitious, really. We are going to deconstruct the organic evolution of a religion.
Right. We want to trace the mechanism of how a prehistoric people who initially worshipped the raw, unbridled forces of the wind and fire right outside their huts.
How they eventually transformed into a culture that engineered massive, intensely complex sectarian universes.
We are talking about cosmic architectures bursting with multi-armed gods, sapient narrating birds.
Which is a great detail.
I love the birds. Oceans made of milk and wine, and scales of time that make modern astrophysics look kind of conservative.
It's incredibly vast.
We're going to uncover the hidden history layered within these texts and discover how they function as the ancient world's ultimate, ever-updating encyclopedias.
But, before we can even open the pages of the Puranas, before we can talk about the Vishnu Purana or any of the others, we have to look at the soil from which they grew.
We have to map out the massive timeline of Hindu belief. Because you can't really understand the destination without walking the road.
The historical timeline is absolutely crucial here. To understand the Puranas, you really must view them as the third major phase in a very long, very deliberate religious evolution.
So there are 3 distinct phases.
Right. We can segment this evolution into 3 principal forms of the Hindu faith, and each one is defined by entirely different psychological and social mechanics. The earliest form, the absolute bedrock of the religion, is found in the Vedas.
The Vedas being the oldest scriptures dating back thousands of years before the Common Era.
Precisely. The language, the syntax, and the purport of the Vedas indicate a date long anterior to any other class of Sanskrit writings.
They are ancient.
Exactly. And when scholars analyze the fundamental doctrine of these texts, they find an underlying philosophy of a unified deity, a single source in whom the entire universe is comprehended.
But the day-to-day practice looked a lot different, didn't it?
It did. The practical everyday reality for a person living in the Vedic period was very different from that high philosophy. The seemingly polytheistic practices they engaged in were essentially the worship of personified elements.
We're talking about people looking at the terrifying, uncontrollable forces of nature and just giving them names.
Yes. So you have Agni, which is fire.
Right.
You have Indra, representing the firmament or the stormy sky. Vayu is the air or wind. Varuna is the water, Aditya is the sun, and Soma is the moon.
So they're all elemental and planetary personages.
But the critical distinction here, the operational mechanism of this era, is the prevailing character of the ritual itself. It was almost exclusively domestic worship.
Domestic, meaning confined to the home. Tell me what that actually looked like for an average family back then.
Well, it consisted of prayers and oblations. So, offerings of clarified butter, grain, or soma juice, and these were poured directly into the fire in their own hearths.
So no big temples.
No massive public structures at all, no grand temples. The ritual was performed by the head of the household for the individual good of his own family.
He's praying for rain, for a good harvest, for protection from disease.
Exactly. Furthermore, these prayers were addressed to unreal presences.
Unreal in what sense? Like made up?
Unreal meaning invisible forces. They were not praying to statues or visible representations. The religion of the Vedas was not idolatry in the traditional sense.
There was no image worship whatsoever.
None. It was an intimate, abstract relationship between a human being, the fire in front of them, and the invisible elements raging outside their door.
That paints an incredibly visceral picture. I mean, I imagine an agrarian society heavily dependent on the whims of the weather.
Right. Survival was day to day.
When your survival depends on the rain falling and the fire keeping you warm, your religion is inherently going to be tied to those raw elements. It's portable, it's personal, and it's driven by immediate survival needs.
But obviously, society didn't remain a collection of isolated huts. Populations grew, kingdoms formed.
And the religion had to shift to accommodate that new reality.
It did. That simple, primitive form of domestic adoration eventually gave way to the second great phase in our timeline.
Which is?
This is the era of the heroic poems, specifically the epic narratives of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And this represents a massive psychological and sociological transition.
Because the cast of characters fundamentally changes here. We aren't just talking to the wind anymore.
No, we're not. We see the origin and the vast elaboration of legends that form the great body of the mythological religion of the Hindus.
So the lore really starts building.
Right. During this epic phase, image worship begins to be alluded to in the texts. But the most significant mechanical shift is the rise of hero worship. The spiritual narrative pivots almost entirely upon the doctrine of incarnations, or avatars.
Avatars. So we're talking about figures like Rama and Krishna.
Exactly. Based on historical analysis, figures like Rama and Krishna appear to have originally been real historical characters.
Like actual people.
Yes. Charismatic princes, brilliant warriors, political leaders. But within the sprawling narratives of these heroic poems, they are elevated to the dignity of divinities.
They become literal impersonations of the gods on earth.
Yes. The daily ritual is still loosely tied to the ancient Vedic forms, but the objects of panegyric, the figures people are actually singing songs about and invoking for help, are shifting heavily towards specific deities.
Namely Vishnu and Shiva.
Exactly. We are seeing unequivocal indications of a departure from the purely elemental worship of the Vedas.
Okay, let me test an analogy here to see if I'm grasping the sociological mechanics of this shift. Let's look at this through the lens of the music industry.
I am curious to see where this goes. Proceed.
Right, so during the Vedic phase, the religion is like acoustic folk music.
Yep.
It's stripped down. It's played in your living room around a literal hearth fire. It's deeply personal, focused on fundamental life struggles, and it requires no infrastructure, just you and the acoustic guitar of the elements.
A fitting comparison for the localized, decentralized nature of domestic oblations.
Right. But as society centralizes, as cities grow and kings consolidate power, you enter the epic phase, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. This is the birth of stadium rock.
Ah, I see.
Suddenly you need massive, larger-than-life frontmen to unite huge populations. You have Rama and Krishna. These historical figures become absolute superstars.
They draw a massive crowd.
Exactly. The narratives become grand. The stakes are the fate of the entire world. There are epic battles, incredible drama, and huge crowds of followers. It functions as a massive shared cultural event that binds a vast kingdom together.
That captures the expansion of scale perfectly. The transition from the hearth to the stadium mirrors the transition from localized elemental worship to the grand unifying narratives of the avatars.
Which brings us inevitably to the third phase, the era that forms the core of our source material today.
The era of the Purāṇas.
If the epics are the unifying stadium rock era, what happens when we get to the Purāṇas?
The Purāṇas represent a later stage, characterized by an intense, almost uncompromising sectarian fervor.
So it splinters.
Heavily. In this third phase, the paramount importance is no longer a shared, unified pantheon. Instead, supreme importance is assigned to individual divinities, almost exclusively either Shiva or Vishnu.
Right.
The authors of the Purāṇas take the theoretical cosmology introduced in the epic poems, they expand it exponentially, they systematize the chronologies, and they engineer incredibly definite, connected representations of mythological fictions.
Thus, extending the music analogy, the Purāṇas represent the modern era of hyper-specific music subcultures and fragmented fan bases.
That tracks.
Society has moved past the unified stadium show. Now, the audience is splintered into fierce, dedicated subgenres. You have the Shiva fan base operating over here with their own highly specific rules, unique merchandise, and exclusive lore. And you have the Vishnu fan base over there doing the exact same thing.
And they are fiercely debating.
Right. They are fiercely debating, in this case, through competing ancient texts, about which group is the ultimate supreme authority.
Exactly. They are no longer creating guides for Hindu belief as a whole. They are writing proprietary manuals for separate and sometimes deeply conflicting branches of it.
That's fascinating.
The source material strongly supports that reading. These texts were compiled for the evident, conscious purpose of promoting the preferential, or in many cases, the sole, worship of either Vishnu or Shiva.
And this shift is monumental in the context of human history.
It truly is.
It marks a complete transition from individuals praying for basic survival in their own homes to a massive, systematized, heavily institutionalized, temple-based religion.
It is driven by competing sects, each utilizing immense resources and complex theology to establish the absolute supremacy of their chosen deity.
It is wild to imagine the psychological whiplash of living through that long transition. I mean, your distant ancestors whispered prayers to the storm clouds, and now you're expected to navigate incredibly complex temple hierarchies.
You participate in highly regimented public rituals.
Yeah, and declare absolute loyalty to a deity with a specific face, specific weapons, and a specific cosmic backstory. It is a complete paradigm shift in how a human being interfaces with the concept of the divine.
It is the ultimate institutionalization of belief, and because this third era is entirely defined by these texts, the Purāṇas, it forces us to ask a fundamental structural question.
A question that scholars like H.H. Wilson spent decades trying to untangle.
Which is, structurally speaking, what exactly is a Purāṇa?
And the answer to that question reveals one of the most fascinating literary paradoxes in ancient history.
It really does.
Let's break this paradox down. Because the Sanskrit word Purana literally translates to something old. It inherently implies that the objective of the text is to preserve ancient traditions. And the classical scholars of ancient India actually had a very strict, legally defined framework for what constituted a Purana.
They did. We can look at the lexicon of Amarasingha, an eminent Sanskrit lexicographer who lived in the 1st century BCE.
Right.
He provides a highly specific, universally accepted synonym for the word Purana. He calls it Panchalakshanam.
Panchalakshanam. That sounds like a rigid architectural blueprint.
It is. It translates literally to that which has 5 characteristic topics.
5 topics.
Yes. And among ancient scholiasts and commentators, there is absolutely no difference of opinion regarding what these 5 topics are.
So it was set in stone.
Essentially. If a text claimed to be a Purana, it was required by strict definitional law to cover these 5 distinct areas of knowledge.
Imagine being an ancient publisher or a royal scribe given this mandate. You are tasked with writing the definitive history of the universe. What boxes do you legally have to check?
Well, we have the list.
I have the list from Wilson's translation right here. Let's go through them.
Please do.
Requirement number 1, sarga, which means primary creation or cosmogony. So you have to explain how the universe came into existence from absolute nothingness or from formless, crude matter.
Correct. Requirement number 2, pratisarga, meaning secondary creation. This involves the destruction and renovation of worlds.
So the life cycles of the universe.
Exactly. You must detail the massive cyclical chronological timelines. How does the world end? How long does it lay dormant? And how is it periodically reborn?
Okay, requirement number 3, vamsa, which is the genealogy of gods and patriarchs. You have to lay out the sprawling family tree of the divine beings and the original sages.
Yes. Requirement number 4, manvantara, or the reigns of the Manas.
Menace.
This is a system of cosmic timekeeping, detailing the vast, almost incomprehensible epochs of human and divine history overseen by these primordial rulers.
Got it. And finally, requirement number 5, vansanucharita, which is history. You must record the particulars and the lineages of the princes of the solar and lunar races, tracking their descendants all the way down to modern times.
So when we synthesize the Panchalakshanam, the mandate is clear.
Right. A Purana must be a comprehensive manual covering the creation of matter, the cyclical destruction of the universe, divine family trees, cosmic epochs, and terrestrial royal history.
It is the ultimate, all-encompassing historical and scientific encyclopedia of the ancient world. That is the gold standard established 56 years before the Christian era.
Yet when we arrive at the paradox,
The great paradox.
when H.H. Wilson and his contemporaries actually sat down to examine and translate the 18 major Puranas that have survived to the modern day, they made a startling discovery.
A very frustrating discovery for them initially. Not a single one of them strictly adheres to this definition.
Wait, out of 18 massive texts, none of them follow the legally defined blueprint.
Not one perfectly matches the Panchalakshanam.
That is wild.
To some of the texts, the definition is utterly inapplicable. They don't even attempt to cover those 5 topics. To others, it only partially applies.
So what are they writing about instead?
Well, instead of focusing on history and cosmogony, these medieval manuscripts are packed to the brim with sectarian instructions, highly localized and bizarre rituals, complex rules for temple worship, and thousands of pages dedicated to extolling the exclusive greatness of one specific god.
It's all propaganda.
Largely, yes. The royal genealogies and the creation of the world are often treated as completely extraneous afterthoughts. They're either shoved to the marans or omitted entirely to make room for sectarian instructions.
Okay, I have to challenge this, because if I'm a historian looking at these texts,
Right.
if they were entirely rewritten by later priests to push a specific sex agenda, and if they completely abandoned the original 5-topic rule, why should we trust them at all?
Fair question.
Aren't they basically just medieval fan fiction at this point? Why did Wilson dedicate years of his life to translating what he himself referred to as pious frauds?
That is a highly logical objection, and it was exactly the stance taken by many early European scholars. They looked at the sectarian embellishments, saw the blatant propaganda, and wanted to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Which makes sense.
But Wilson possessed a much more nuanced view of textual history. He realized that while they were indeed pious frauds, created for temporary political and sectarian purposes, the authors never completely destroyed the ancient, authentic core material.
To borrow a concept from computer science, it's kind of like looking at open source software.
How do you mean?
Well, imagine the original ancient Panchalakshanam text is the foundational open source code of the religion. It has the history, the creation myth, the royal lineages.
Okay, I'm with you.
Then, hundreds of years later, a sect of Shiva worshippers comes along. They want to create a proprietary operating system.
Right.
But instead of writing a new code from scratch, they just take the ancient open source code, leave it running in the background, and write thousands of lines of their own specific sectarian code over top of it.
Yeah.
They overwrite the interface, but the core programming is still buried in there somewhere.
That is a brilliant mechanical analogy. The sectarian interpolation, the proprietary code, is almost always palpable enough to be identified and set aside by a skilled linguist or historian.
You just have to know what to look for.
Exactly. And once you strip away that medieval propaganda, what remains underneath is incredibly valuable primitive material. The Puranas functioned as massive cultural sponges.
They soaked up whatever was deemed valuable at the time.
They absorbed real dynastic histories, ancient philosophical concepts, and genuine astronomical observations, preserving them alongside the newer religious instructions.
Wow.
They are a vital record of the form of Hindu belief that bridged the gap between the Vedic era and the modern era. And their very existence proves that an earlier, uncorrupted class of Puranas, the true Panchalakshanam texts, absolutely did exist at one point.
Because we are literally reading the fragmented remnants of them embedded within these newer versions.
Precisely.
It is like finding a priceless 12th century historical manuscript. But a medieval monk has scribbled his own angry political opinions all over the margins.
Right.
You don't throw the manuscript in the fire just because the monk was irritating. You just train yourself to read around his handwriting.
That is exactly what Wilson did. And the way these ancient fan bases classified these texts tells us exactly what kind of handwriting we're dealing with. The Padma Purana, for example, offers a categorization of the 18 Puranas that divides them into 3 specific qualities, or gunas.
Now, as a quick aside for you listening, as we dive into how these texts categorize each other, we are strictly operating as historical observers here.
Yes, very important context.
We are impartially reporting on the ancient sectarian rivalries documented in the source texts. When one Greek labels another's book as darkness, we are merely observing the historical flame war. We are not endorsing any theological viewpoint.
A necessary clarification. So according to this ancient, highly biased system, the texts are classified as follows. The first tier are the Sattvika Puranas. The term Sattvika implies purity, goodness, and truth.
Okay.
And unsurprisingly, considering who wrote this classification, these are the Vaishnava Puranas, the texts dedicated exclusively to the worship of Vishnu.
It is the oldest trick in the book. My faction's literature is the literature of pure goodness.
Human nature is remarkably consistent.
Right.
The second tier are the Tamasa Puranas. This word denotes darkness, ignorance, or gloom. And these are indisputably the Shaiva Puranas, the texts dedicated to the worship of Shiva.
So the Vishnu faction literally codified the Shiva faction's sacred texts as the books of ignorant darkness. The theological mudslinging was institutionalized.
It was baked into the literature itself. Finally, the third series are designated as Rajasa, which relates to the property of passion or activity.
And who do those belong to?
These texts generally focus most heavily on the stories of Brahma, or in certain interpretations, the worship of the female principle, Shakti, or the youthful, highly passionate forms of Krishna.
It is an absolute masterclass in ancient propaganda.
Yeah.
But you know what I find even more compelling than the internal infighting?
What's that?
It's what happened when these ideas traveled. Because this ideological sponge, this massive repository of thought, didn't just soak up local Indian politics.
No, it did not.
The philosophical core of the Puranas actually seeped out into the wider ancient world. It established a philosophical bridge between India and the West that completely rewired my understanding of ancient history when I read Wilson's notes.
You are pointing toward the Puranic concept of pantheism and its historical connection to Alexandrian philosophy.
Yes, exactly. Walk us through the mechanics of this. Because it's one thing to say ideas traveled, but Wilson actually tracks the specific ideological cargo.
Let us first establish the philosophical payload itself. The pantheism found in the Puranas is one of their most invariable and defining characteristics.
Okay, what is it?
It is the complex theological proposition that the one supreme being, whether temporarily manifested as Shiva or Vishnu, is the fundamental cause of all things, and is, in fact, all that exists.
It is the ultimate dissolution of boundaries. God isn't a carpenter who built the table. God is the wood. God and nature are entirely identical.
Exactly. The one supreme being manifests the universe either through an act of divine illusion or simply as cosmic sport or play. Therefore, the divinity is the cause of all that is and is simultaneously the entirety of existence.
Right.
Now, this concept, the absolute identity of God and nature, is not an entirely unprecedented notion in antiquity, but it suddenly assumed a massive, unprecedented vigor in the early ages of Christianity, specifically carried and propagated by the Platonic Christians.
And Wilson points out a direct, verifiable historical vector between the Puranas and these early Western philosophers.
He does, and the historical timeline aligns perfectly. We know from economic and historical records that there was a highly active line of communication between the Indian subcontinent and the ports of the Red Sea during the early centuries of the Christian era.
We're talking trade routes.
Yes. In the 2nd century, specific trade routes were flourishing. Merchants were taking advantage of the monsoon winds to transport physical merchandise, spices, pepper, precious silks from India to Alexandria in Egypt.
Alexandria. At this time, it is the beating heart of Mediterranean intellectual life. It has the great library. It's a melting pot of Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Jewish thought.
A true intellectual crucible. And it was at this exact same period, right in the middle of the 2nd century, that a philosopher named Ammonius Saccas instituted the sect of the Neoplatonists at Alexandria.
Okay, here we go.
What is critical here is the stated, explicit basis of his philosophy. He openly claimed that true philosophy derived its origin from the Eastern nations.
He actually credited them.
Yes. His core defining doctrine, the absolute identity of God in the universe, is functionally identical to the pantheism of the Vedas and the Puranas.
But it goes beyond just adopting a broad philosophical stance, right? The actual physical practices match up.
This is where the evidence becomes undeniable. The specific practices Ammonius enjoined upon his disciples and the ultimate objective of those practices were mechanically identical to those described in several of the Puranas under the system of yoga.
Wow.
He taught his Greek and Roman disciples to extenuate by mortification and contemplation the bodily restraints upon the immortal spirit.
Which is yoga.
Exactly. The goal was that in this life they might enjoy direct communion with the Supreme Being and ascend after death to merge with the universal parent.
It totally blows my mind. You have a Greek-speaking philosopher in Egypt in the year 150 teaching his students to practice Hindu yoga.
It's remarkable.
It is ancient globalization at its absolute finest. I mean, think about the boats. You have massive merchant ships riding the monsoon winds, their holds filled with physical cargo like cinnamon and silk. But sitting on the decks are merchants and monks trading the literal blueprints of the universe.
And this historical connection forces us to ask a compelling question regarding the nature of cultural exchange.
Was it a two-way street?
Exactly. Was it merely a one-way transmission? Wilson astutely notes that it likely was not. The importation of ideas was perhaps not wholly unrequited.
How do you mean? How did the West influence the East in return?
The foundational Hindu doctrines may have received fresh animation, a new vocabulary, from their adoption and adaptation by the successors of Ammonius, the Alexandrian mystics.
Oh, interesting.
The philosophical debates happening in Egypt may have prompted, or at least provided new expressions for, the theological concepts we now read in the later iterations of the Purāṇas. It created a vast intercontinental philosophical feedback loop between the Indian subcontinent and the Mediterranean basin.
The proof of this feedback loop is incredibly striking. I know Wilson cites the writings of Synesius.
Yes, who was a Christian bishop operating at the beginning of the 5th century.
Right. And if you read the hymns written by this Christian bishop, they are structurally and thematically perfectly parallel to the prayers addressed to Vishnu in the Vishnu Purana.
Almost line for line.
You can almost take a paragraph from the bishop, swap the name God for Vishnu, drop it into the Purana, and literally no one would blink an eye. It demonstrates how deeply and fundamentally interconnected the intellectual landscape of the ancient world truly was.
It shatters the notion of isolated development. These texts were not written in a vacuum. They were active participants in a massive, living, breathing, intercontinental intellectual ecosystem.
Okay, so having established the massive philosophical reach of these texts, and having understood how they functioned as these ever-evolving open-source cultural sponges...
It is time to look at the books themselves.
Yes. It's time for us to actually pull some of these books off the shelf. We need to crack open the spines of the 18 major Puranas. Now, we obviously cannot cover the tens of thousands of pages they contain, but Wilson's source material gives us a heavily curated tour of the most fascinating, bizarre, and revealing examples.
The sheer diversity of content within these texts is truly staggering. They range from the sublime to the deeply pragmatic, and sometimes to the utterly bizarre.
Let's start with the bizarre.
Very well. Let us begin with one that completely defies the standard sectarian expectations we just discussed, the Markandeya Purana.
The Markandeya. This one jumped out at me immediately because, as Wilson notes, it is uniquely non-sectarian. It seems entirely uninterested in the bitter Shiva versus Vishnu flame war.
It rarely bothers to insert prayers to any specific deity.
Right. Instead, it's mostly just an uninterrupted succession of wild, sprawling legends. And this is the detail I absolutely love. The main narrators of this epic theological text are a flock of hyper-intelligent sapient birds.
Yes, the celestial birds.
Wait, literal birds?
Literal sapient birds. The narrative framework is quite extraordinary. A sage named Gemini is plagued by profound questions regarding the nature of the universe.
As one does.
He seeks answers, and he is ultimately referred to a flock of highly sapient birds who reside deep in the Vintia Mountains.
I have to ask, why birds? What is the philosophical or narrative utility of having pigeons or crows explain the cosmos?
It is actually a brilliant narrative device. The text explains that these birds were born on a horrific battlefield, steeped in the carnage of human conflict.
Okay, dark.
But they were rescued and brought up by a wise sage. Because of their heavenly descent and their unique vantage point, literally a bird's eye view of human folly and cosmic drama, they are completely detached from human biases.
Oh, I see.
They are profoundly versed in the Vedas and spiritual truth because they observe it without being entangled in it. Therefore, these birds possess the pure objectivity required to narrate the text and answer the sage's questions.
It is like an epic fantasy novel narrated by an avian chorus. But it's not just an entertaining story, right? It is culturally vital.
Immensely so. The Markandeya Purana contains an embedded section known as the Chandipatha, or the Durga Mahatmya.
What's that?
This is a legendary, highly detailed text chronicling the fierce victories of the supreme goddess Durga over various powerful evil beings, or asuras. The combat is described with considerable martial power and spirit.
Okay.
And its relevance is not merely historical. To this very day, that Chandipatha serves as the foundational textbook for the worshippers of Kali or Durga, particularly in regions like Bengal.
Wow.
It is read daily in her temples. It provides the entire theological bedrock for the massive modern Durga Puja festival.
So a text that is framed by the narration of mythical intelligent birds serves as the literal theological engine for one of the largest, most vibrant religious festivals operating in the world today.
It highlights the enduring power of these texts.
It really does.
Yeah.
But from the birds of the air, let's dive into the water. Let's look at the Matsya Purana.
Ah, the Matsya. The word itself means fish. This Purana is dedicated to the fish avatar of Vishnu. What is most fascinating here, from a comparative mythology standpoint, is the flood narrative it contains, which shares striking, unmistakable mechanical parallels to the story of Noah's Ark in the Abrahamic traditions.
Let's compare the mechanics. Walk us through how the Hindu iteration of the Great Flood plays out in this text.
In the Matsya Purana, a great cosmic inundation is prophesied to completely overspread the world, an apocalyptic cleansing.
Just like Noah's flood.
Exactly. Vishnu, manifesting in the form of a massive horned fish, approaches a pious king named Manu. Vishnu preserves Manu and gives him a very specific mandate.
Build a boat.
Build a massive ark. Manu is tasked with gathering the seeds of all living things, every plant, every animal, and loading them into this ark.
It is the ultimate cosmic preservation protocol. But the imagery of how the ark survives the flood is what really sets this apart from the Noah story. It gets intensely cinematic.
Indeed. While the ark floats on the terrifying, endless expanse of the floodwaters, it must be anchored, or rather towed, to ensure its survival.
You can't just drift around.
Exactly. It is tethered directly to the giant horn of the cosmic fish. And what material do they use for a tow rope strong enough to withstand an apocalyptic flood?
This is the best part.
The great primordial serpents of the world willingly come to the king to serve as the cords, fastening the massive ark to the fish's horn.
Think about the visual scale of that scene. You have a human king standing on a wooden boat holding the genetic seeds of all life on Earth. He is being towed through a violently churning cosmic ocean by a deity in the shape of a leviathan fish.
And the rope pulling them is made of massive, ancient snakes.
That is mythological world building at its absolute peak.
And amidst this chaotic cinematic backdrop, while they are floating on the destroyed world, Manu engages in a deep philosophical conversation with the fish.
Naturally.
Manu's questions and the profound replies of Vishnu regarding the nature of reality and cosmic cycles form the main substance and teachings of the compilation.
Okay, so we have celestial birds debating philosophy. We have a king surfing a cosmic flood behind a giant fish. Let's pivot to something that feels completely anachronistic.
Which would be?
The Agni Purana. When Wilson describes the contents of this text, my immediate thought was, this isn't a religious scripture. This is the Wikipedia of the ancient world.
That is perhaps the most accurate modern equivalent.
Really?
Yes. The Agni Purana is theoretically communicated by Agni, the deity of fire, but it presents a stark, almost jarring contrast to narrative texts like the Markandeya or Matsya. It completely discards the traditional Panchalakshanam rules.
It doesn't care about the royal lineages or cosmic floods.
Not at all. Instead, it functions purely as a practical secular cyclopedia.
It's a massive data dump of ancient practical knowledge. Run through some of the chapters in this book because it is wild.
It contains an extensive treatise on medicine compiled directly from the teachings of the ancient legendary physician Susruta.
Okay, medical texts.
It includes detailed chapters on the pragmatic duties of kings, diplomacy, and the art of war. It contains manuals on archery and the proper use of various weapons.
Wait, archery manuals in a holy text.
Yes. It also has a comprehensive chapter on judicature, civil law, and property rights.
Property rights.
It even includes incredibly dense treatises on rhetoric, prosody, and the strict rules of Sanskrit grammar, drawing upon the ancient linguistic masters Pingala and Panini.
This breaks my brain a little bit. I mean, why take a supposedly sacred religious text, name it after the primordial fire god, and stuff it full of medical treatises, tax laws, and grammar lessons? What is the logic behind merging secular survival skills with divine scripture?
If we examine the sociological function of a text in antiquity, the logic is incredibly sound.
Walk you through it.
In many ancient communities, the local temple and its priests were the sole repository of knowledge. If a village's library essentially consists of one single massive book, the local Purana, then you absolutely need that book to contain everything necessary for the survival and administration of civilization.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. It is an ancient survival guide wrapped in theology.
Precisely. If someone breaks their leg, the priest needs to know how to set the bone. If a neighboring kingdom attacks, the local leaders need to know martial strategy.
If a land dispute arises, they need legal precedents.
And regarding the grammar, if the language degrades over generations, the sacred mantras lose their phonetic power.
Right.
By wrapping vital secular knowledge in a religious framework, by saying, the fire god demands you understand these medical and grammatical rules, you sanctify the knowledge. You ensure it is meticulously preserved, copied, and respected across generations.
It was brilliant pragmatism. Here is how you pray to Shiva to save your soul. And by the way, Chapter 4 explains how to apply a tourniquet and string a longbow. It shows how deeply integrated religion was with the sheer act of surviving.
Indeed it does.
But of course, not all the texts were this pragmatic. Some went in the absolute opposite direction. Let's look at the Padma Purana.
The Padma Purana is a colossal, overwhelming text. It clocks in at roughly 55,000 stanzas. 55,000.
And it represents the polar opposite of the Agni Purana's secular encyclopedic approach. The Padma, specifically in its later, heavily interpolated sections, pushes an intense, uncompromising, and highly intolerant devotion to Vishnu.
This is the superfan element taking control and driving the car right off a cliff.
It is the apex of sectarian exclusivity. It admits no compromise with any other form of faith. It doesn't just encourage devotion. It mandates the absolute veneration of specific physical items, such as the salagram stone and the tulasi plant.
Okay.
And it goes so far as to prescribe the tapta mudra.
I have to pause here. The tapta mudra, we are talking about physical branding, correct?
Yes. The text prescribes the practice of literally stamping the name or symbols of Vishnu onto the skin of the worshiper using a hot iron.
Okay, I have to push back on the logic of this evolution. We started this deep dive by talking about the Vedic era.
We did.
We described a person sitting quietly in their home, offering butter to a hearth fire, meditating on invisible forces. How do we logically justify the leap from peaceful domestic meditation to a religious requirement that you literally sear your own flesh with a branding iron? What broke in the theology to allow that kind of extremism?
What broke, or rather what intensified, was the sociological pressure of a crowded religious marketplace.
The competition.
Exactly. As we moved into the medieval period, the competing sects were desperate to establish undeniable loyalty among their followers. In a society teeming with different philosophical schools and rival temples, abstract meditation wasn't enough to mark your allegiance.
They needed something permanent.
The tapta mudra is the ultimate, irreversible in-group signal. When a religious faction demands physical pain and permanent scarring as a price of admission, it weeds out casual believers and creates a hyper-dedicated, fiercely loyal core group.
Wow.
It is undoubtedly no part of the original ancient Vedic system. It is a stark indicator of how extreme and physical the sectarian fervor became as these groups vied for dominance.
It is the ultimate proof of commitment. Show me your scars, and I'll know which god you truly serve. It's dark, but from a sociological perspective, you can completely see why an ambitious religious leader would mandate it.
The very effective tactic.
Now, just to show how incredibly wide the net of the Puranas is cast, let's briefly mention one more before we move on. The Bhavishya Purana, the Book of Prophecies.
The Sanskrit word habishadi translates literally to what will be. Therefore, this text is theoretically framed as a book foretelling future events.
But does it actually do that?
In practical execution, it functions mostly as a detailed manual of religious rites and ceremonies. But the most historically fascinating anomaly occurs in its final chapters.
Which focus on a distinct group of people called the Magas.
Yes.
Who exactly are they and why are they anomalous?
They are described within the text as silent sun worshippers who hail from a foreign land called Sakadvipa. Now, when linguistic scholars like Wilson analyze this, they realize the profound implication. The compiler of the text appears to have adopted the Persian term ma, referring to the magi.
The Magi.
Yeah.
As in the Zoroastrian priests.
Exactly. This Hindu text appears to be directly documenting and perhaps attempting to integrate the traditions of the Persian Zoroastrian fire worshippers of Iran.
That is amazing.
It is a stunning textual artifact that once again proves India was not a hermetically sealed cultural system. It was actively absorbing, documenting, and interacting with the religious traditions of its neighbors to the far west.
It is just an incredible, baffling library of human thought. I mean, we have scrolled past fantasy epics narrated by birds, cinematic flood myths, comprehensive medical encyclopedias, demands for extreme physical branding, and the documentation of Persian fire worshippers, all living under the single umbrella term of Purana.
It covers everything.
But while all these vastly different texts were serving the diverse needs of their local communities, one specific text rose above the rest of the noise. It achieved a level of fame that dwarfed all the others.
Yes, it became the most influential, the most deeply beloved of them all.
You were referring, of course, to the Bhagavad Purana. But its immense, unprecedented fame sparked what I can only describe as a massive, vitriolic, ancient copyright dispute. It ignited an academic flame war that tore through the scholarly community.
The intense controversy surrounding the authenticity of the Bhagavad Purana is highly unique. It is one of the very few critical questions affecting their sacred literature, which Orthodox Hindu writers themselves actually ventured to openly discuss, debate, and argue over in historical records.
Let's set the stage for this IP dispute. What makes the Bhagavad Purana so special? Why were the stakes so high?
The Bhagavad Purana is a massive, towering cultural touchstone comprising roughly 18,000 verses. It exercises a more direct, emotional, and powerful influence upon the daily opinions and feelings of the populace than perhaps any other Purana.
And why is that?
The reason for this overwhelming popularity is structural. Its 10th book is appropriated entirely to the history of Krishna.
And Krishna is fundamentally different from a distant, abstract, cosmic principle.
Precisely. The text details his life in vivid, relatable detail. It chronicles his adventures, his miraculous feats, and crucially, his juvenilities.
His childhood.
Yes, the stories of him as a mischievous child stealing butter, or as a youth playing the flute for the cowherds. It grounds the divine in the intensely personal and emotional.
People could relate to him.
Because of this, it has been translated into perhaps all the regional languages of India, and is universally beloved across almost all social strata.
It is the ultimate blockbuster franchise. It is the IP that everyone wants a piece of. But the fierce debate that erupted was over its provenance. Who actually wrote the blockbuster?
Orthodox tradition vehemently claims it was written by the legendary, divinely inspired sage Vyasa, and the text itself contains a highly convenient narrative frame to justify this claim. The story goes that Vyasa had already accomplished monumental tasks. He arranged the 4 Vedas, he compiled the other Puranas, he wrote the great epic, the Mahabharata.
He's been busy.
Very busy. And yet, despite all this, he still felt a profound sense of spiritual dissatisfaction.
The immortal sage was depressed.
Exactly. The text describes him wandering in perplexity along the banks of a river. He is approached by a divine sage, Narada, who diagnoses his problem.
What's the diagnosis?
Narada tells Vyasa that his dissatisfaction stems from a specific failure. He had not sufficiently dwelt upon the supreme merit of worshipping Krishna, or Vasudeva.
Now let's see where this is going.
So, to cure his depression and complete his spiritual work, Vyasa sat down and wrote the Bhagavad Purana.
Okay, if I am a rival scholar, I am immediately calling foul. That sounds exactly like a retcon.
A retcon.
Yeah, a retroactive continuity. It is a highly convenient fictional story designed specifically to explain why this massive, incredibly popular book was conspicuously absent from all the older established lists of the original 18 Puranas.
And that is exactly the logical flaw that ancient skeptics and rival scholars immediately attacked.
The math simply does not work.
It does not. If Vyasa wrote it after he finished compiling all the other Puranas, then by the text's own admission, it cannot be one of the original 18 Puranas. It is a later edition trying to pass itself off as original canon.
So if the immortal sage Vyasa didn't write it, who do the skeptics point the finger at? Who is the actual author?
A very strong historical tradition, supported by many learned scholars and later verified by linguistic analysis, considers the Bhagavat Purana to be the work of a mortal man.
A mortal man.
A highly skilled grammarian named Vopadeva. Historical records indicate he flourished at the court of Hemadri, a Raja, and likely lived in the 12th or 13th century CE.
Let's pause and appreciate the linguistic proof here. Wilson and other scholars looked at the grammar of the text. It's the equivalent of finding a newly discovered play that claims to be written by Shakespeare in the 1500s, but the characters keep using words like selfie or internet.
That's a great comparison.
The syntax gives away the era. The Bhagavat Purana uses 13th century grammatical structures while claiming to be thousands of years old.
That is a perfect encapsulation of the philological evidence. The grammatical complexity and the specific vocabulary used by Vopadeva are heavily imprinted on the text, which means this beloved scripture, the most popular text in the entire culture, is actually a product of uninspired medieval erudition, not ancient, divine revelation.
And when this realization began to circulate, it set off an absolute firestorm. The academics went to war. And I have to say, looking at Wilson's notes, the titles of the pamphlets these scholars wrote attacking each other are some of the most hilarious, petty things I have ever read in a historical document.
The vitriol was remarkably intense. The controversy was ignited when a respected commentator named Sridhara Swamin publicly admitted in his writings that there were legitimate doubts regarding the text's ancient authenticity.
He opened Pandora's box.
Once that seal was broken, the tracts and pamphlets started flying back and forth across the subcontinent.
Listen to these actual historical titles. A scholar named Ramas Rama decided to write a fierce defense of the text, claiming it was truly ancient. He titled his academic pamphlet, "A Slap of the Face for the Vile."
A somewhat aggressive posture for a theologian.
Right. He goes straight for the ad hominem. But then, a rival scholar named Kasinath enters the fray. Kasinath argued that a completely different text was the true original Purana. He responded to Ramas Rama with his own pamphlet, and he titled it, "A Great Slap of the Face for the Wicked."
He felt the need to escalate both the adjective and the violence of the metaphor.
And then, the absolute pinnacle of ancient pettiness. A third, nameless disputant, clearly exhausted by both of them, clapped back with a final tract that he simply titled, "A Slipper."
Yes.
As in, I am taking off my shoe and hitting both of you in the face with it.
To quote the exact translation, he called it a slipper for the same part of the same persons. It is a remarkable, highly entertaining display of academic temper and fragile egos.
I absolutely love it because it proves that human nature hasn't changed one single bit in thousands of years. We tend to look back at these ancient, revered scholars in their flowing robes, and we imagine they were sitting around in serene, detached meditation.
But they were not.
No. They were getting into incredibly toxic, vitriolic flame wars over textual canon. It is literally identical to modern internet arguments over franchise lore.
Think about Star Wars or the Marvel Universe.
Exactly. This new movie contradicts the established timeline. You're not a real fan. Here's my 10,000-word Reddit post titled, "A Slap in the Face for the Vile Writers of Season 8. It is the exact same psychological energy, just translated into Sanskrit.
It is a profound parallel, and it demonstrates a crucial sociological truth. It shows how deeply emotionally invested people become in the narratives that define their cultural identity.
It wasn't just a grammar debate.
The battle over the Bhagavat Purana was not merely a dry debate about dates and syntax. It was a battle over who had the authority to control the narrative of Krishna, the most beloved deity in their culture. The stakes were absolute.
But while the mainstream Orthodox scholars were slapping each other with metaphorical slippers over the major mainstream Puranas, there was a whole other tier of texts operating in the background.
The spin-off.
The spin-offs. And these texts pushed the boundaries of Hindu religious practice into much darker, entirely unfiltered, and highly visceral territory.
You are referring to the Upa Puranas, or the minor Puranas.
Yes.
While the major texts dealt with grand cosmic architectures, royal lineages, and the mainstream sanitized worship of Vishnu and Shiva, the Puranas served a different function.
Where were they doing?
They often documented highly localized, highly esoteric, and fiercely independent regional cults. A prime, heavily studied example is the Purana.
The Purana. How does this minor text diverge from the massive cosmic blueprints we've been discussing?
The Purana diverges wildly from the standard Orthodox formula. It abandons the broad cosmic histories. Instead, it focuses almost entirely on the worship of the female powers, the Saktas, and specifically centers on the fierce, formidable, and terrifying goddess Kali.
Okay.
It belongs to what is known as the Sakta modification of Hindu belief.
Let's define that for the listener. When we talk about the Sakta modification or the Brahmanical system, what are the actual mechanics of what is happening on the ground?
The Brahmanical system represents the orthodox, mainstream, patriarchal structure of the religion. So the top-down, highly formalized worship of male deities like Vishnu and Shiva, overseen by a strict priestly caste.
Got it. And the Sakta?
The Sakta modification represents a fundamental theological pivot. It moves away from the male deities and focuses on the supreme, unfiltered, active power of the divine feminine. It is often more grassroots, more visceral, and heavily tied to regional earth goddesses.
And the practices described in the Purana reflect that visceral nature, right? We aren't talking about offering butter to a fire anymore.
Far from it. The text meticulously describes the origin and implementation of tantric rituals, specifically what are categorized as left-hand practices.
What does that entail?
It contains highly detailed, graphic chapters on sanguinary or bloody sacrifices. It provides specific instructions on the immolation of animals, and in some historical contexts, references to human sacrifice to appease the fierce goddess.
Wow.
Furthermore, it associates these intense practices heavily with a specific physical geographical region, the northeastern areas of Bengal and Assam, and specifically the celebrated temple of Kamakya in that region.
So as a historian, how do we make sense of this? I mean, why did a religion that started with simple, peaceful prayers to the wind and fire fragment into these intense, esoteric, and sometimes bloody cults?
It's a key question.
What is the historical mechanism that allows the pristine philosophy of the Vedas to coexist under the same broad umbrella as the bloody altars of Assam?
It is entirely about the mechanics of religious expansion and absorption. You must view Hinduism not as a single rigid monolith, but as an infinitely adaptable framework. As the Orthodox Brahmanical system expanded its influence geographically across the vast Indian subcontinent, it inevitably encountered fiercely independent, indigenous regional beliefs, like the intense, deeply rooted goddess worship in the Northeast.
And if you are an expanding religious empire, you really only have two choices. You either eradicate or assimilate.
Exactly. And eradication is historically very costly, and it often fails. So the system chose assimilation. Instead of trying to wipe out those local beliefs, the Brahmanical scholars absorbed them.
And the Purana is the evidence of that.
The Purana is the literal textual evidence of this assimilation strategy in action. It shows an Orthodox religion trying to reconcile highly esoteric, localized, bloody indigenous rituals with its own grand universal cosmic philosophies.
So the theological politics play out like this. The Orthodox priests arrive in a new region. The locals are worshiping a fierce, bloody earth goddess. The priests don't say, stop worshiping her.
No, they wouldn't dare.
Instead, they say, you can keep your goddess, and you can keep your specific rituals. But we are going to write a new book, Vishnu Purana, that explains how your local goddess is actually just a regional manifestation of Parvati, the wife of our cosmic god Shiva.
It is a brilliant, highly effective strategy of theological compromise. It brought the terrifying local goddesses into the grand, sanitized pantheon by identifying them as aspects of the broader cosmic system.
It's just smart politics.
It is a mechanism of assimilation that allowed the religion to become incredibly diverse, absorbing the practices of millions of different people while still maintaining a loose, overarching structural unity.
He is the ultimate big tent religion. We have been on a massive, sprawling journey today. We've examined the outliers, the secular encyclopedias, the fan fiction copyright disputes, and the edgy, dark regional spin-offs.
We have covered a lot.
Now, for our final act, let's bring it all back to the center.
Yeah.
Let's look at the text that H.H. Wilson ultimately chose to dedicate his life to translating. The text that acts as the absolute gold standard for this entire massive genre, the Vishnu Purana.
Out of all the sprawling, chaotic texts available, Wilson found that the Vishnu Purana is the masterwork because it stays truest to that original ancient 5-topic definition, the Panchalakshanam.
Right, the blueprint we talked about earlier.
While it undoubtedly champions the worship of Vishnu, it doesn't get entirely lost in the weeds of sectarian rituals or highly localized temple legends. It actually makes a genuine, sustained attempt to deliver on the promise of being a comprehensive history of the cosmos.
And the sheer scale of the history it attempts to document is mind-boggling. Let's talk about how this text handles the mechanics of time and creation. We aren't just talking about a 7-day creation myth here.
Not at all. The Vishnu Purana details primary and secondary creation by mapping out scales of time that are almost mathematically incomprehensible to the human mind.
Give us a sense of the scale.
It describes epochs known as the days of Brahma and vast, sprawling periods called kalpas. It presents a cosmological model of a universe that is not created just once, but is periodically destroyed and reborn in an endless, eternal, unyielding cycle.
It's a cyclical universe, which fascinatingly mirrors some highly modern cosmological theories regarding the expansion and contraction of the universe.
The parallels are striking. The text describes how, at the end of a kalpa, the physical world is utterly annihilated. The elements are broken down and merged back into a primary formless substance.
It just resets.
The universe lays dormant in a state of absolute equilibrium, and then eventually the balance is disturbed and the entire cosmos evolves out again.
But it doesn't just stick to dry physics or math. It blends this deep, abstract philosophy with mythological storytelling in a very unique way. You pointed out in your notes how it takes abstract concepts from ancient philosophy and literally personifies them to explain how the world was built.
Yes. To explain the mechanics of creation, the Vishnu Purana borrows heavily from the ancient Sankhya philosophy.
Let's break Sankhya down for the listener because it's a pretty dense concept.
Sankhya philosophy deals fundamentally with dualism. It posits that the universe is made of 2 distinct eternal principles: spirit, which is called Purusha, and matter, which is called Pradhana.
Let me try a mechanical analogy here. If we look at this like a computer system,
Okay.
matter, or Pradhana, is the hardware. It's the physical monitor, the microchips, the keyboard. It exists, but it is completely inert. It can't do anything on its own.
Right.
Spirit, or Purusha, is the software. It is pure consciousness. In order for the computer to actually function, in order for the universe to be created, the software must interact with the hardware. Spirit must enter matter.
That is an exceptionally clear way to explain Sankhya dualism. The hardware needs the software.
Thank you.
But what the Vishnu Purana does is take that dualism and subsume it under its sectarian umbrella. It claims that both spirit and matter, both the hardware and the software, are merely different aspects of the one supreme programmer, Vishnu.
Oh, I see.
And when it moves from creating the physical universe to the challenge of peopling the earth with human society, it uses a profound system of allegory.
The story of the patriarchs, this is my favorite part of the text because it shows how myths are actually born.
The text details the creation of the original patriarchs, the mind-born sons of the creator god Brahma.
Right.
These men are tasked with populating the newly formed earth. But they obviously need wives to do so. So where do these primordial wives come from?
They didn't just meet them at a coffee shop.
No, they did not. The authors of the text didn't just invent random names. They gave the patriarchs wives whose names are literal, direct translations of virtues and concepts.
Like what?
The patriarchs are married to women named Faith, Devotion, Content, Intelligence, and Tradition.
Which is so clearly a philosophical metaphor. If you are an ancient philosopher trying to explain the roots of human civilization, you say, a man must marry devotion in order to give birth to religious practice. A man must marry intelligence to give birth to knowledge. It's an allegorical equation.
Precisely. It was a highly sophisticated allegorical way for the original authors to explain the genesis of human society, morality, and obligation.
But something happens to this allegory over time, doesn't it?
What is truly fascinating here is observing the mechanics of how religion devolves over time. As the religion grew, as the centuries passed and the audience changed, the populace became more literal and sectarian.
They forgot it was a metaphor.
Later, readers and practitioners lost the philosophical nuance. They began to take these allegories literally.
They stopped seeing them as equations.
Yes. They began to view faith and devotion not as abstract, vital concepts required for a good life, but as literal, physical women of flesh and blood who walked the earth and gave birth to physical children. The philosophical metaphor calcified into rigid historical myth.
It's the ultimate millennia-long game of historical telephone. A brilliant philosopher writes a beautiful, poetic allegory about the birth of human intelligence, and 1,000 years later, a group of literalists are building a stone shrine to intelligence's physical grandson.
It shows how the human brain constantly tries to drag the abstract down into the tangible.
It really does. But despite these towering cosmic myths and these calcified allegories, the Vishnu Purana also makes a very deliberate attempt to ground itself in physical reality, particularly when it comes to its geography.
The geographic transition in the text is quite jarring, but highly deliberate. When it first describes the map of the world, it sounds like pure, unrestrained fantasy.
Give us the fantasy map first.
It describes Mount Meru at the absolute center of the universe, surrounded by 7 perfectly circular continents, which are in turn separated by massive concentric oceans made of milk, clarified butter, wine, and sugarcane juice.
Pure, unfettered mythological world building. Sounds delicious, honestly.
But then the camera zooms in. When the text narrows its focus to describe Bharatavarsha, which is the ancient term for the Indian subcontinent, the mythological, fantastical tone abruptly drops away.
It gets real.
It suddenly lists actual, geographically verifiable mountain ranges. It names real rivers that still flow today. It meticulously catalogs real nations, tribes, and cities that historians know existed in antiquity.
It abruptly grounds the cosmic fantasy in the actual dirt, rock, and water of the reader's reality.
Exactly.
It's a brilliant psychological trick. If I'm an ancient priest, I tell you a story about an ocean of milk at the center of the universe. You can't verify that. But then I tell you that the river flowing outside your village is part of that same cosmic system.
Suddenly, the infinite, eternal cosmos is connected directly to your own backyard.
It makes the mythology feel real and immediate. Now, before we wrap up this incredible journey, there is one last massive mystery I want to touch on regarding the Vishnu Purana, and really the authorship of all the Puranas.
The elusive author.
The legendary Vyasa. The Orthodox tradition claims he wrote practically everything, but Wilson's linguistic analysis yields a very different, much more profound conclusion.
Yes. The name Vyasa is traditionally applied to Krishnadvaipayanā, the supposedly immortal, divinely inspired sage who is credited with writing the 4 Vedas, the massive Mahabharata epic, and all 18 major Puranas.
It is an impossible biography for one human being.
It is. But Wilson, looking at the root of the Sanskrit word, points out a structural truth. The word Vyasa is not a personal name. It is a generic title. It literally translates to the arranger or the compiler.
So Vyasa wasn't a single hyper-caffeinated immortal guy pulling all-nighters for 3,000 years.
No. Vyasa likely represented an entire institution. It was a college, a continuous lineage, or a dedicated school of highly trained scholars.
Kind of like a title passed down.
It was a collective of learned men who, over the course of many centuries, took on the monumental task of collecting, editing, and perpetually updating the sacred literature of the Hindu civilization.
They were the ultimate editors.
They were. They gathered the scattered oral traditions, the ancient royal genealogies, the highly localized village myths, the complex astronomical data, and the evolving philosophical theories, and they arranged them. They shaped them into the standardized formats we now recognize as the Vedas and the Puranas.
The arranger. That is such a powerful paradigm-shifting concept. It completely changes how you interface with these ancient texts. When you read the Vishnu Purana, you aren't hearing the voice of one isolated genius sitting in a cave.
You are hearing the curated, debated, heavily edited voice of an entire civilization echoing across millennia.
Well, we've covered an absolutely immense amount of ground today. Let's take a deep breath and recap the incredible architectural journey we've been on.
It has been a long journey.
We started by looking at the oldest bedrock of the faith. We saw the stripped-down, acoustic folk music of the Vedic era, individuals focused on survival, offering quiet prayers to the invisible forces of fire and wind in the privacy of their own homes.
We tracked the sociological mechanisms that caused that simple faith to evolve into the stadium rock of the epic poems. We saw how the consolidation of society elevated historical heroes like Rama and Krishna to divine unifying status.
Then we entered the complex modern era of the Purāṇas, the age of hyper-specific subcultures. We saw how the original open-source code of the Panchalakshanam was overwritten by sectarian priests creating pious frauds to push their own agendas.
Yet those same texts acted as vital cultural sponges, preserving the ancient history of the world in their margin.
We explored the massive, intercontinental philosophical reach of these ideas. We saw how the pantheistic concepts of Hindu yoga traveled along trade routes to Alexandria, heavily influencing early Christian thought and creating a global intellectual feedback loop.
We took a curated tour of an impossibly diverse library. We debated philosophy with the sapient birds of the Markandeya. We sailed through a cinematic apocalypse tethered to the giant fish of the Matsya.
We read the secular, pragmatic, ancient Wikipedia of the Agni, and we questioned the brutal physical in-group signaling of the hot iron branding in the Padma.
We witnessed the vitriolic, deeply human academic flame wars over the intellectual property of the beloved Bhagavad Purana, reading pamphlets where scholars literally threw metaphorical slippers at one another.
We looked at the darker regional edges of the faith in the minor Puranas. We examined the brilliant theological politics of assimilation, showing how local, bloody earth goddesses in Assam were absorbed into the mainstream Orthodox pantheon.
And finally, we examined the Vishnu Purana itself, the absolute gold standard of the genre.
We saw how profound philosophical allegories calcified into rigid myth, how the text built a geographical bridge between the infinite cosmos and the literal rivers of India, and how a continuous lineage of editors known as the arranger shaped the reality of millions.
And this brings us back to the core reason why this ancient history matters so deeply to you, the listener, today. It is very easy to look at a museum exhibit or a translated manuscript and view these ancient texts as static, dusty, rigid, dead scriptures.
It's so easy to do that.
But what H.H. Wilson's masterful analysis demonstrates is that the Puranas are the exact opposite of dead. They are the living, breathing, incredibly messy, constantly updated diaries of a complex civilization.
They reveal a people actively, desperately trying to understand the mechanics of the cosmos.
They document their history, they assimilate their neighbors, and they find their psychological place in a universe that is both terrifyingly vast and intimately domestic.
They are the muddy, complicated waters of human history. Which brings us back to the thought we opened the show with. We often demand that history act like an X-ray machine. We want a clean, binary, black and white image.
We want a clear date and a single author.
But the sprawling architecture of the Puranas proves that true human history isn't an X-ray. It's a massive, ancient oil painting. It has thousands of layers applied by thousands of different conflicting hands over centuries. It's murky, it's contradictory, and it's messy.
But because of that messiness, it is also infinitely richer, deeper, and more colorful than a simple black and white snapshot could ever be.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. We talk extensively about the concept of Vyasa, not as a single immortal man, but as a title meaning the arranger.
The unseen force.
Right. It represents the collective school of thought that compiles human knowledge, edits it, shapes it, and ultimately presents it to the masses as undeniable reality. If the lineage of Vyasa was the arranger of the ancient world, who or what is the Vyasa of our modern world?
That is a fascinating question.
Think about the mechanics of your own reality. Are the opaque, proprietary algorithms that silently curate our internet feeds, deciding with ruthless efficiency what information we see and what voices we don't, acting as the new digital arranger?
They certainly curate our reality.
Or are the crowdsourced, largely anonymous editors of Wikipedia, the modern lineage of Vyasa, constantly overriding, debating, and updating our collective historical reality in real time?
It's the same mechanism.
And thousands of years from now, when the historians of the future dig into the massive, sprawling server farms of the 21st century, how will they judge the digital Puranas of our age? Will they see our pure philosophical advancements, our toxic internet flame wars, our weird, edgy cultural spin-offs?
And most importantly, will they possess the critical skills to read through the margins of our own modern pious frauds to find the authentic truth underneath?
Think about the invisible hand of the arranger the next time you scroll through your feed.
A deeply relevant and vital question to end our analysis on. The arranger is always at work, shaping the narrative.
Always. Thank you for taking this massive architectural deep dive with us today. Keep questioning the margins. Keep connecting the historical dots, and we'll see you next time.
Everything we explore today is only as valuable as what you do with it. Information without transformation is just noise. Over the last decade, I've built a methodology specifically designed to help you take what you are learning about your mind, your emotions, your consciousness, and yourself, and actually live it, use it. Use it practically in your daily life. It is the methodology which I called the Alim method, which stands for awareness, letting go, intention, and mindfulness. Or when you master it, it becomes alive in miracles. And if today's episode stirred something up in you, come find out how I can put it into practice, how you can use this practical tool in your life, visit elimmethod.com or connect with me on Instagram, Spirit of James.